Have you ever found yourself lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling, lost in a thought so strange that it feels like your mind is unraveling? Some ideas are so perplexing, so paradoxical, that they seem to twist reality itself. These are the kinds of thoughts that don't have clear answers, the kind that stretch the limits of logic and make you question everything you thought you knew. Tonight, we're going on a slow and immersive journey through some of the most mind-bending logical puzzles and paradoxes ever conceived. From ancient dilemmas to modern thought experiments, each one is designed to make you think, deeply, slowly, and perhaps even endlessly. But don't worry, this isn't the kind of thinking that demands urgency. It's the kind that drifts, wanders, and dissolves into the quiet stillness of the night. We'll explore the mysteries of identity, the limits of knowledge, and the strange loops of decision-making. We'll wrestle with questions about free will, reality, and whether we can ever truly trust our own perceptions. Some of these paradoxes will challenge the nature of truth itself, while others will leave you wondering if you even exist in the way you assume. As you listen, let your mind move at its own pace. There's no need to solve anything, no rush to find answers. Just let the ideas flow, like waves on a shoreline, coming and going, carrying you gently towards sleep. So take a deep breath, sink into your pillow, and let's begin. The paradox of identity. Who are you? Not just your name or your memories or the body you inhabit, but you. If someone asked you to define yourself in a single sentence, could you do it? Identity is something we take for granted, but when we start to question it, things quickly become complicated. Imagine a ship, an old wooden vessel sailing across the ocean. Over time, its planks rot and are replaced one by one until not a single original piece remains. Is it still the same ship? Now imagine all the discarded planks are gathered and rebuilt into a new ship. Which one is the real ship? This is the ship of Theseus, one of the oldest and most famous identity paradoxes. Identity seems simple on the surface. You are you because you've always been you. But the deeper we look, the more it begins to slip through our fingers. Your body is constantly changing. Cells die and regenerate, your brain forms new connections, and your memories shift. If everything about you slowly changes, then at what point do you stop being the person you were before? If you could replace every part of your body, piece by piece, would you still be you? Consider an even stranger case: teleportation. Suppose a machine scans you down to the atomic level, then destroys your body and rebuilds an exact copy on the other side of the world. The new version has all your memories, your thoughts, and even the feeling that it's still you. But is it? Did you just move from one place to another, or did the original you die and a perfect copy take your place? If you believe you survived, then what if the original wasn't destroyed, but instead two identical versions of you existed at the same time? Which one is the real you? The paradox of identity doesn't just apply to individuals. Think of cultures, languages, and societies. They evolve over time, changing in ways both big and small, yet we often speak of them as if they're the same entity. A country today is not the same as it was centuries ago, yet we still call it by the same name. When does a thing stop being what it was and become something new? Memory plays a huge role in how we define ourselves. We think of our past selves as the same person we are today, even though we've changed in countless ways. But what happens if our memories are altered? If you woke up tomorrow with all your past experiences replaced with someone else's, would you still be you? And if a person gradually loses their memories, at what point do they become someone else entirely? Philosophers like John Locke suggested that identity is tied to consciousness and memory. As long as you remember your past, you are the same person. But what if your memories are false? What if your entire life was implanted into your mind just moments ago? There would be no way to tell. Perhaps identity is more like a story, a continuous narrative we tell ourselves. But even stories change. We reinterpret them, add new chapters, and sometimes rewrite the past in our minds. Does this mean we are nothing more than an evolving tale? Some argue that identity is an illusion altogether. In Buddhism, the concept of an unchanging self is rejected. Instead, we are seen as an ever-shifting process, a flow of thoughts, sensations, and perceptions with no true core. What we call I is just a collection of experiences, constantly in motion. And then there's the unsettling possibility that identity is just a useful fiction, a convenient way to navigate the world. Maybe we cling to the idea of a stable self because it makes life easier, not because it's true. But if that's the case, does it even matter? If we feel like ourselves, then perhaps that's all that really counts. The paradox of identity doesn't have a simple answer. It leaves us in a strange place where we are both ourselves and something else entirely. And as you drift into sleep, you might find that you too are changing, thoughts shifting, memories blending, and consciousness flowing, like a ship sailing into the unknown. The experience machine. Imagine you had the chance to live the perfect life, every moment filled with joy, adventure, and deep fulfillment. No pain, no sadness, only the most extraordinary experiences you could ever dream of. But here's the catch. It's not real. It's a simulation, created by a machine that can perfectly replicate any experience you desire. The question is, would you step inside? This is the experience machine, a thought experiment proposed by philosopher Robert Nozick. The machine would give you the illusion of a perfect life, making you believe everything was real. You wouldn't know you were in a simulation. As far as you were concerned, you would wake up every day feeling, thinking, and living exactly as you do now, except with complete happiness. But if you knew ahead of time that this was all an illusion, would you still choose it? Some would argue that you should. If happiness is what matters most, then the source of that happiness shouldn't matter. Whether it comes from real experiences or artificial ones, the feeling is the same. If you could remove suffering and live in a state of pure joy, why wouldn't you? If life is about feeling good, then the machine is the perfect solution. But Nozick disagreed. He believed that plugging into the machine would be a mistake. Why? Because happiness isn't the only thing that matters. We value truth, meaning, and genuine relationships. Even if the experiences felt real, they wouldn't be. The love you felt would be simulated. Your accomplishments would be empty, and your identity would be nothing more than a programmed illusion. Living in a perfect simulation might feel good, but it wouldn't be living. There's also the question of control. If the machine decides your experiences, are you really making choices? You might believe you have free will, but in reality, the machine is crafting everything for you. Without real agency, are you even yourself anymore? Would you still be human, or just a programmed response to artificial stimuli? And what about suffering? Many of the things that make life meaningful, growth, wisdom, deep connections, come from struggle. Pain shapes us, teaches us, and gives contrast to our joy. Without hardship, could happiness even exist? If you've never known sadness, can you truly appreciate bliss? The machine eliminates suffering, but in doing so, it might also eliminate the depth of human experience. Then again, how different is this from reality? How do we know that what we experience now isn't just another version of the machine? Could our senses already be deceiving us? What if we're in a vast simulation, unaware that everything we see, hear, and feel is just an illusion? If we can never know for sure, does it even matter? And consider this. People already escape into artificial worlds every day. Video games, movies, virtual reality. These are all ways we immerse ourselves in experiences that aren't real. If we're willing to spend hours in fantasy worlds, what's stopping us from making the leap into a full simulation? Maybe the real reason we hesitate is because we don't want to admit how much we already do this. Another unsettling thought. What if the machine already exists, but in reverse? What if right now, you're inside an experience machine designed not for pleasure, but for challenge? Maybe you chose this life, this imperfect, unpredictable existence, because real meaning comes from struggle. Maybe when you die, you'll wake up in another world, stepping out of the machine, remembering why you entered in the first place. Ultimately, the experience machine forces us to ask, what do we truly value? Is happiness enough, or do we need something more? Do we seek truth, even if it brings suffering? Or are we already living in a carefully crafted illusion, convincing ourselves that reality is real because we fear what it might mean if it isn't? As you drift towards sleep, let the question linger. If offered the perfect life, free of all hardship, would you take it? And if not, why? Munchhausen Trilemma. How do you know what you know? You might say that you base your beliefs on evidence, logic, or reasoning. But if you keep asking why, over and over again, you'll eventually reach a point where no further justification is possible. This is the heart of the Munchhausen Trilemma, a paradox that suggests all knowledge is ultimately unsupported. The name comes from Baron Munchausen, a fictional character who once claimed to have pulled himself out of a swamp by tugging on his own hair. The trilemma suggests that when we try to justify any belief, we face three impossible choices, none of which truly resolve the problem. The first option is infinite regression, where every claim must be supported by another claim, which is supported by another, and so on forever. Imagine trying to trace back every fact you believe. Why do you know the Earth is round? Because of satellite images. Why trust satellite images? Because of scientific methods. Why trust science? Because it's been tested and verified. But how do you know verification works? Every answer requires another answer, leading to an endless chain of justification. But if no final answer exists, can we ever truly know anything? The second option is circular reasoning, where a claim is justified by itself. This happens when we assume what we're trying to prove. For example, if someone says the Bible is true because it is the Word of God, they're assuming that God's Word is true in order to prove that the Bible is true. It's like saying, I'm always right because I said so. But if reasoning is circular, does it ever prove anything at all? The third option is axiomatic assumption, where we stop asking questions and accept something as a given truth. In mathematics, we assume that 1 + 1 = 2 without needing to prove it. In science, we assume the laws of physics hold everywhere, even though we can't test every corner of the universe. But who decides which assumptions are valid? If we can't justify them, aren't we just accepting them on faith? The Munchhausen Trilemma suggests that every system of knowledge is built on shaky ground. Either we enter infinite regression, rely on circular reasoning, or take unproven assumptions as truth. No matter which option we choose, we can never fully justify our beliefs. This raises an unsettling question. Is knowledge even possible? If everything we believe is ultimately unsupported, how do we know anything at all? Philosophers like Descartes tried to escape the trilemma by searching for an undeniable truth. His famous answer, I think, therefore I am, suggested that the act of thinking proves our existence. But does this solve the problem, or is it just another assumption? Some argue that knowledge isn't about absolute certainty, but about practicality. Science works, logic works, and our assumptions allow us to navigate the world successfully. Maybe we don't need perfect justification, just something that works well enough. But does that mean we should stop questioning, or does it mean that truth is just a useful illusion? The trilemma also appears in everyday life. When someone challenges your beliefs, how do you justify them? Do you point to evidence, which leads to more questions? Do you fall into circular reasoning? Or do you eventually say, that's just what I believe? If no belief can be completely justified, does that mean all beliefs are equally valid? Or are some still better than others? Perhaps the real lesson of the Munchhausen Trilemma is humility. If no knowledge is truly certain, then maybe we should always remain open to doubt. Instead of clinging to absolute truths, we might be better off embracing the idea that everything we know could one day be proven wrong. And as you drift into sleep, let that thought settle. If all knowledge is built on uncertain foundations, then what is really real? And does it even matter? The problem of evil. If the universe is ruled by an all-powerful, all-knowing, and perfectly good being, why does evil exist? This is one of the oldest and most troubling philosophical dilemmas. It challenges the very foundation of how we understand morality, suffering, and the nature of the divine. The problem of evil forces us to ask, if a perfect God exists, why does the world contain so much pain? There are two types of evil that this paradox considers. The first is moral evil, the suffering caused by human actions, wars, crimes, cruelty, and deceit. If God is all-powerful, why not stop people from committing these acts? Why allow humanity to make choices that lead to so much destruction? The second type is natural evil, disasters, diseases, and tragedies that happen without human involvement. Earthquakes, pandemics, and childhood illnesses. Why do these things exist if the universe was created by a benevolent force? A common response is that evil exists because of free will. If humans were programmed to be perfect, we wouldn't truly be free. Love, kindness, and goodness would have no meaning if they weren't chosen voluntarily. A world without choice would be a world without real morality. But this raises another problem. Why allow suffering that isn't caused by human choices? A hurricane that wipes out a village or a genetic disease that causes immense pain, these have nothing to do with free will. Others argue that suffering has a greater purpose. Perhaps evil and hardship exist to build strength, to test character, or to bring about deeper wisdom. Without darkness, could we truly appreciate light? Without loss, could we understand love? But this explanation is unsettling. If suffering is necessary for good, does that mean every tragedy is justified? And if we could create a world without suffering, would it be wrong to do so? Some propose the soul-making theodicy, the idea that suffering helps shape souls into something greater. Like metal being refined in fire, pain and struggle may be the process through which we become something more. But does this justify the immense suffering in the world? If God is all-powerful, couldn't the same growth happen in a less painful way? Then there's the mystery defense, the idea that human minds simply can't understand divine reasoning. Perhaps there's a greater plan beyond our comprehension, and what seems like evil to us may have a deeper purpose in the grand design. But if we accept this, then anything could be justified. If suffering has some hidden purpose, how do we know what's truly right or wrong? Atheists often argue that the existence of evil is evidence that a perfect God does not exist. If suffering is unavoidable, perhaps the universe isn't governed by a benevolent force at all. Maybe existence is indifferent, and morality is something we create for ourselves. But this raises another paradox. If there's no divine law, then where does morality come from? If suffering is meaningless, then why do we feel so deeply that it shouldn't exist? Some thinkers suggest that evil exists simply because of the way reality is structured. If laws of physics govern the world, then disasters, disease, and death are inevitable outcomes of natural processes. Maybe existence isn't designed for happiness, it's designed for survival. But if that's true, then why do we long for something more? Why does the idea of a perfect world feel so natural if such a thing has never existed? The problem of evil doesn't have a simple answer. It leaves us caught between logic and faith, between hope and doubt. And as you drift into sleep, you might wonder, if suffering is part of life, is it something to be explained or something to be overcome? The unexpected gift paradox. Imagine this. Someone tells you that you will receive a surprise gift next week. But here's the catch. The gift must be unexpected. If you predict when it will arrive, then it's no longer a surprise. But the moment you start thinking logically, something strange happens. Let's say today is Monday and you start analyzing the situation. If the gift doesn't arrive by Saturday night, then Sunday must be the day. But if you can predict it will come on Sunday, then it's not a surprise, so it can't come on Sunday. That means Saturday must be the latest possible day. But by the same logic, if it doesn't arrive by Friday, then Saturday would be predictable. So it can't be Saturday either. Following this reasoning, you eliminate Friday, then Thursday, then Wednesday, until you conclude that the gift can't possibly arrive as a surprise at all. And yet, at some point, the gift arrives, and you're completely shocked. The paradox has beaten you. This is known as the unexpected gift paradox, a variation of the unexpected hanging paradox, where a prisoner is told he will be hanged on a surprise day next week. The paradox works because of a contradiction between logical reasoning and real-world expectations. Logically, the prisoner or gift recipient proves that a surprise is impossible. But in reality, when the event happens, they are surprised, meaning their logic must have been wrong. One way to resolve the paradox is to say that human reasoning is flawed. When we try to use strict logic on uncertain events, we might overlook how real surprises work. Perhaps our mistake is assuming that knowing all possible days automatically means knowing the actual day. Another explanation is that paradoxes expose the limits of logic itself. The way we frame problems can lead us to impossible conclusions. Maybe the issue isn't with the gift or the hanging, but with the way we try to predict the future. Life doesn't always follow rigid patterns, and sometimes things happen outside of our expectations. Then there's the idea that uncertainty is built into reality. In quantum physics, particles exist in a state of probability until they are observed. Maybe the same thing happens with surprise events. They remain unpredictable until they actually happen. Could it be that some things are fundamentally unknowable until they occur? The paradox also raises interesting questions about determinism and free will. If we could perfectly predict every future event, would surprises even exist? If every action has a logical cause, then everything that happens is inevitable. But if that's true, then what exactly is a surprise? Is it just an illusion caused by our ignorance? This paradox is also similar to Gödel's incompleteness theorems, which suggest that within any logical system, there are truths that can't be proven. Maybe the unexpected gift paradox reveals one of these limits, a situation where logic says something can't happen, yet reality proves otherwise. And what about the human mind itself? Could it be that the paradox only exists because of how we think? If we didn't analyze the situation so deeply, the gift would simply be a surprise, and there'd be no problem at all. Maybe paradoxes are less about the world itself and more about the way our brains try to make sense of it. Ultimately, the unexpected gift paradox reminds us that the world isn't always as predictable as we think. Some things remain unknown until they happen, no matter how much we try to anticipate them. And as you drift into sleep, you might wonder, are there surprises waiting for you in the future, ones you could never expect, no matter how much you try? The drinker's paradox. Imagine walking into a bar. You glance around at the crowd and wonder, is there at least one person here such that if they are drinking, then everyone in the bar is drinking? At first, this seems like an odd question. How could one person's drinking determine whether everyone else is drinking? But in logic, this statement turns out to be always true, no matter what. This is the drinker's paradox, a strange yet valid result in formal logic. It states, there exists a person in the bar such that, if they are drinking, then everyone in the bar is drinking. At first glance, this seems impossible. Surely there must be a situation where this statement isn't true. But the paradox arises because of the way implication works in formal logic. In logic, an if-then statement is considered true as long as the condition is either false or both the condition and result are true. This leads to an odd conclusion. Breaking it down, let's say the bar has at least one person in it. We now have two possible scenarios. 1. Nobody in the bar is drinking. If this is the case, then the statement is automatically true. Why? Because if we pick any person in the bar, the condition, if they are drinking, is false. And in logic, an if-then statement is always true when the if part is false. This means the paradox holds, even though nobody is drinking. Number 2, at least one person in the bar is drinking. If we choose that person as our special person, then the statement is also true, because if they are drinking, then everyone, including themselves, is drinking. No matter what, the statement ends up being true. But this feels completely counterintuitive. How can logic lead to a conclusion that seems disconnected from reality? What this paradox tells us about logic. The drinker's paradox highlights the difference between formal logic and common sense reasoning. In everyday life, when we hear an if-then statement, we assume a causal relationship, that one thing directly affects another. But in formal logic, an if-then statement isn't about causation, it's about structure. If the first part is false, the whole statement is automatically true, even if the second part makes no sense. This paradox also reveals the power and the strangeness of existential quantifiers in logic. When we say there exists a person, we don't actually have to identify them. The statement works even if the only reason it's true is because of a technicality in logic. It's as if the structure of language itself is playing a trick on us. Implications beyond the bar. The drinker's paradox isn't just a strange puzzle, it has deeper implications in philosophy and mathematics. Similar logical structures appear in set theory, probability, and even in artificial intelligence, where computers must deal with logical implications that don't always align with human intuition. It also raises questions about truth and meaning. If a statement can be logically true but still feel misleading, what does truth really mean? Is logic a perfect system for understanding reality, or are there gaps where intuition and experience matter more? Another unsettling thought: could similar paradoxes exist in everyday life without us noticing? What if many of the things we assume to be true are actually just quirks of language and logic? How many of our beliefs are shaped by assumptions we've never questioned? A final thought. The drinker's paradox reminds us that logic, though powerful, doesn't always align with our expectations. It shows us that truth can be slippery, that statements can be true in ways that don't seem to make sense. And as you drift into sleep, you might wonder, how many other truths exist in the world, hidden behind layers of logic, waiting to be uncovered? The island of truth-tellers and liars. Imagine you find yourself stranded on a strange island where every inhabitant belongs to one of two groups: truth-tellers, who always tell the truth, and liars, who always lie. You don't know who is who, and you need to figure it out. But there's a catch. No matter what question you ask, a liar will always try to deceive you. The island of truth-tellers and liars is a classic logical puzzle that forces you to think carefully about how information works. If you meet a random person on the island and ask, "Are you a truth-teller?" you can't trust the answer. A truth-teller would say yes, but so would a liar, because a liar must lie about being a liar. So how do you uncover the truth? The clever question. There is a well-known solution. Instead of asking a direct question, you ask something indirect. You can ask any person, "If I asked someone from the other group whether you are a truth-teller, what would they say?" Now let's analyze what happens. If you ask a truth-teller, they will truthfully report what a liar would say. And since a liar would lie and say you're a liar, the truth-teller will truthfully repeat that falsehood. If you ask a liar, they will lie about what a truth-teller would say. And since a truth-teller would truthfully call them a liar, they will lie and still say you're a liar. No matter who you ask, you will always get the same answer. So now if you hear liar, you know the person is a truth-teller. If you hear truth-teller, you know the person is a liar. By forcing both types of people into the same pattern of deception, you extract a reliable answer from an unreliable situation. The deeper meaning of this paradox. This puzzle seems simple, but it reveals something profound about truth, deception, and knowledge. In real life, we constantly deal with unreliable sources, misleading information, and hidden motives. How do we find the truth when we can't trust what we hear? How do we navigate a world where people have their own biases, interests, and agendas? The puzzle also connects to self-reference paradoxes, like the famous liar paradox, which states, "This statement is false. If the statement is true, then it must be false, but if it's false, then it must be true." Just like the island puzzle, this paradox shows how truth can become tangled in its own logic. The problem of absolute truth. The island puzzle also reflects a deeper philosophical question. Is truth absolute, or is it just a matter of perspective? On the island, truth-tellers and liars seem to live in two separate realities. But in the real world, isn't it possible that we all live in our own version of the truth? What if truth is just a construct shaped by the questions we ask and the answers we expect? Some philosophers argue that all knowledge is shaped by the way it is framed. Just like on the island, the way we phrase a question can determine the kind of answer we get. If our assumptions are flawed, we might be trapped in a cycle of falsehoods without even realizing it. Real-world parallels. Beyond philosophy, the island of truth-tellers and liars has real-world implications. It is similar to situations where people deliberately spread false information, whether in politics, advertising, or conspiracy theories. When faced with conflicting claims, how do you know what's real? The key, as the puzzle teaches us, is to think strategically about how questions are framed. This is also important in computer science and artificial intelligence, where programs must process information from sources that may not always be reliable. How do you train an AI to separate truth from falsehood when its data comes from the internet, a place full of both truth and deception? A final thought. The island of truth-tellers and liars isn't just a puzzle. It's a reflection of how we seek truth in an uncertain world. It shows that sometimes the right question is more important than the right answer. And as you drift into sleep, you might wonder, in your own life, how many truths are hidden behind the way questions are asked? The Epimenides Paradox. Imagine a man standing before a crowd declaring, "All Cretans are liars." Now consider this. Epimenides, the person who made this statement, was himself a Cretan. If what he says is true, then he too must be a liar. But if he is a liar, then his statement must be false. And if his statement is false, then at least some cretins must tell the truth, which contradicts his claim that all cretins are liars. This is the Epimenides Paradox, a self-referential loop that ties logic into knots. The structure of the paradox. At its core, this paradox is an example of self-reference, where a statement talks about itself in a way that creates an endless contradiction. It belongs to the same family as the liar paradox, which is even simpler. This statement is false. If the statement is true, then it must be false. But if it's false, then it must be true. The paradox is impossible to resolve because it keeps flipping back and forth between being true and false. The bigger implications. While this might seem like just a linguistic trick, the Epimenides Paradox has deep implications for logic, truth, and knowledge. It forces us to ask, can a system of logic be truly complete if it allows for statements that contradict themselves? If we take language at face value, does it always lead us to truth, or can it trap us in logical dead ends? Paradoxes in mathematics. This paradox isn't just a philosophical curiosity. It actually played a role in the development of modern mathematics. The famous mathematician Kurt Gödel used a similar form of self-referential logic in his incompleteness theorems, which proved that in any sufficiently complex mathematical system, there are statements that are true but cannot be proven. This shattered the hope that mathematics could be built on a perfect, self-contained system of rules. If mathematics itself is incomplete, what does that say about the limits of human knowledge? Are there truths we will never be able to prove, no matter how advanced our reasoning becomes? Truth in a world of contradictions. The Epimenides Paradox also raises questions about how we define truth. In everyday life, we assume that statements are either true or false, but paradoxes like this show that some statements don't fit neatly into either category. They hover in an ambiguous space where logic itself breaks down. Could this mean that truth is more complex than we think? What if some statements exist outside of binary truth and falsehood? Could reality itself be full of contradictions waiting to be discovered? Philosophical implications. This paradox also connects to ideas in epistemology, the study of knowledge. If truth depends on context and perspective, then perhaps contradictions aren't errors, but fundamental parts of reality. Some Eastern philosophies, like Taoism, embrace the idea that opposites can coexist, that truth and falsehood might be two sides of the same coin. Even in quantum physics, we find strange parallels. Wave-particle duality suggests that light and matter can behave both as particles and waves, two seemingly contradictory states that somehow exist together. Could paradoxes like the one from Epimenides hint at a deeper structure of reality? Lies, politics, and society. Beyond philosophy and science, the Epimenides Paradox also has real-world implications in politics, misinformation, and propaganda. When someone claims that everything the media says is a lie, they are making a statement similar to Epimenides. If their claim is true, then their own statement, which is part of the media, must also be a lie. We often hear claims that undermine themselves, statements that discredit the very systems they rely on. How do we handle these contradictions? Do we dismiss them as nonsense, or do they reveal something deeper about how we communicate and understand the world? A final thought. The Epimenides Paradox reminds us that truth is not always simple. It shows that logic, despite being one of our most powerful tools, has its limits. And as you drift into sleep, you might wonder, how many contradictions do we accept every day without even realizing it? The two envelopes problem. Imagine you are presented with two envelopes. You are told that one contains twice as much money as the other, but you don't know which one. You pick an envelope, open it, and see some amount, let's say $100. Now you are given the option to switch envelopes. Should you switch or should you keep what you have? At first, it seems like switching is pointless. After all, there's a 50-50 chance that you already have the larger envelope. But here's where things get strange. A simple mathematical expectation calculation seems to suggest that you should always switch, no matter what. The unexpected logic of switching. Let's break it down. You have two possibilities. 1. The envelope you picked contains the smaller amount, meaning the other envelope contains twice as much, so $200. 2. The envelope you picked contains the larger amount, meaning the other envelope contains half as much, so $50. Since you don't know which case you're in, You assume there's a 50% chance for each possibility. Now, you calculate the expected value of switching. If you switch and the other envelope is larger, you gain $100. If you switch and the other envelope is smaller, you lose $50. This suggests that, on average, switching increases your expected winnings to $125, even though you only started with $100. That seems to mean that you should always switch. But wait, if switching is always the better choice, then the logic applies in reverse too, meaning you should always switch back. This leads to an infinite loop where no choice is ever final. Where's the paradox? The paradox emerges because the logic seems to contradict common sense. If switching was always beneficial, then no choice should ever be stable. But in reality, the envelopes were assigned their values before you ever made a decision. Your choice can't magically increase the total amount of money available. The problem lies in the incorrect assumption about probabilities. The 50-50 assumption isn't quite right. If one envelope has X dollars, then the other has either X2 or 2X, but you don't actually know the starting amount, so the calculation isn't symmetrical. Breaking the illusion. To resolve the paradox, we need to realize that expected value calculations only work when we know the true distribution of values. In this case, we don't. If we had a fixed upper limit on the amount of money in the envelopes, the paradox disappears, because we could correctly assign probabilities to each case. Another way to resolve the paradox is to recognize that the problem treats X as a fixed amount, when in reality, it depends on which envelope we picked first. This means we are subtly double-counting possibilities, leading to an illusion that switching is always beneficial. The deeper meaning of the paradox. This paradox isn't just about money, it's about decision-making, probability, and uncertainty. In real life, we often face situations where our choices depend on incomplete or misleading information. The two envelopes problem reveals how flawed reasoning can make a bad choice seem like a good one. It also connects to game theory and risk management. When making decisions, we often rely on probability models, but those models can lead us astray if they're based on faulty assumptions. Are we making choices based on real data? Or are we trapped in an illusion created by an incomplete understanding of probability? Real-world implications. This paradox has practical applications in finance and investing, where people often switch between stocks or assets based on perceived gains without considering the underlying probabilities. Gambling and betting, where players misinterpret odds and believe they have an advantage when they don't. Life decisions, where people constantly wonder whether they made the right choice. Should I have taken that job? Should I have moved to that city? The paradox shows how uncertainty can lead to endless second-guessing. The problem of the criterion. How do we know what we know? It's a simple question, yet one that unravels into one of philosophy's deepest paradoxes. The problem of the criterion exposes a fundamental issue in our understanding of truth, knowledge, and justification. Imagine someone asks you to distinguish true knowledge from mere opinion. You might say that true knowledge comes from a reliable method, but then they ask, how do you know that your method is reliable? To answer that, you would need to justify the method itself using some kind of criteria for reliability. But where does that criteria come from? If it comes from knowledge you already assume to be true, you are caught in a circular loop, justifying knowledge with knowledge that hasn't yet been justified. If you need an external justification, then you face an infinite regress, where every justification requires another, endlessly. This is the problem of the criterion. Before we can determine what we know, we need a criterion for knowledge. But before we can have a criterion, we need to know something. So which comes first, knowledge or the method for obtaining it? Two opposing approaches. Philosophers have tried to tackle this paradox in two ways. 1. Methodism. This approach starts by defining a method for knowledge first, then using that method to determine what we can know. For example, a rationalist might say that reason is the criterion of knowledge, while an empiricist might say that sensory experience is the only reliable method. But how do we justify this method without already assuming some knowledge about what is true? 2. Particularism. This approach starts by assuming we already know some things and then tries to develop a criterion based on those cases. For example, we might take facts like "I exist" or "the external world is real" as self-evident truths, then build a system of knowledge from them. But how do we decide which beliefs to trust if we don't yet have a criterion for knowledge? Both approaches seem to trap us in a paradox. Either we assume knowledge without justification, or we justify knowledge using assumptions we haven't proven yet. The infinite regress problem. At the heart of the problem of the criterion is an infinite loop. Imagine asking, "Why do you believe X?" You might answer, "Because of Y." But then, "Why do you believe Y?" The answer might be because of Z. But now, "Why do you believe Z?" This could go on forever, leaving us without any foundation for knowledge. To escape this loop, philosophers have proposed three possible solutions. 1. Foundationalism. Some knowledge is self-evident and doesn't need justification. These are the starting points from which all other knowledge is built. 2. Coherentism. Knowledge is justified not by a single foundation, but by forming a coherent web of beliefs that support each other. 3. Infinitism. There is no final stopping point. Knowledge is justified by an infinite chain of reasons, but we never actually reach a fully justified truth. Each of these solutions has problems. Foundationalism struggles to explain why foundational beliefs should be accepted. Coherentism risks creating circular reasoning, where beliefs justify each other without any external grounding. Infinitism is often rejected because an infinite chain of justification seems impossible to complete. How this affects everyday thinking. The problem of the criterion isn't just an abstract puzzle. It affects how we think about truth, science, and decision-making. Every time we ask, "How do we know something is true?" we are engaging with this paradox. Science relies on observation and experimentation, but how do we justify the reliability of observation itself? History is built on sources, but how do we determine which sources are trustworthy without already having historical knowledge? Ethics relies on moral principles, but how do we justify those principles without appealing to another standard? The problem applies everywhere, from debates about fake news to philosophical discussions on consciousness. Skepticism. What if we can't know anything? Some philosophers, like Sextus Empiricus, use the problem of the criterion to argue for skepticism, the idea that we cannot have certainty about anything. If we can't justify knowledge without either circular reasoning or infinite regress, maybe we should accept that we don't truly know anything. This radical view suggests that all our beliefs might just be assumptions. Maybe we live in a simulation. Maybe our senses are unreliable. Maybe nothing is as it seems. If we cannot establish a perfect criterion for knowledge, should we just give up on certainty altogether? A possible escape? Pragmatism. One way out of the paradox comes from pragmatism, a philosophy that suggests we should accept beliefs based on their usefulness rather than absolute certainty. Instead of worrying about an ultimate criterion for truth, pragmatists argue that knowledge is what works. For example, we might not be able to prove that our senses are 100% reliable, but they work well enough for us to survive. Science might not provide absolute certainty, but it allows us to build technology and predict the world's behavior. Instead of getting stuck in an infinite loop of justification, pragmatism simply moves forward. A final thought. The problem of the criterion reminds us that knowledge is more fragile than we think. It forces us to confront the limits of human understanding and the foundations on which we build our beliefs. And as you drift into sleep, you might wonder, do we ever truly know anything? Or are we all just choosing to believe what seems most useful? The lottery coincidence. Imagine you buy a lottery ticket. You pick your numbers randomly, with no expectation of winning. The odds are astronomically small, 1 in millions, but against all logic, your numbers match exactly. You win. It feels like a miracle, an impossible event that somehow happened. But was it really that unlikely? Or was it just one of the many bizarre coincidences that occur in the vast randomness of reality? The lottery coincidence is a paradox that plays with our perception of probability and meaning. We instinctively think that an event with incredibly low odds should not happen. But in a world filled with billions of events happening every second, even the most improbable things become inevitable given enough time. How rare is rare? Let's break this down mathematically. If the chance of winning a particular lottery is 1 in 100 million, That sounds impossibly unlikely. But if 100 million people each buy a ticket, suddenly the probability that someone wins is almost guaranteed. Now, expand that beyond just one lottery. There are thousands of lotteries across the world, drawn daily, weekly, or monthly. The odds that at least one of them produces a wildly improbable winner at some point become almost certain. This is the core of the paradox. We assume that highly improbable events should almost never happen. But in a world with millions of people and millions of opportunities, improbable things happen all the time. The illusion of meaning in coincidences. Humans are wired to see patterns and meaning where there may be none. If you win the lottery on your birthday, you might believe it's fate. If you dream about a number and it wins the next day, you might think you had a premonition. But in reality, these coincidences are just a result of statistical inevitability. The famous mathematician Percy Diaconis once pointed out that it would be more surprising if extraordinary coincidences never happened. In a world of billions of people making choices every second, even the strangest events are bound to occur somewhere. Why the human brain struggles with probability. The lottery coincidence exposes a flaw in human thinking. We don't intuitively grasp large numbers and probability. If something has a 1 in a billion chance, our brains interpret it as impossible. But if a billion people try it, suddenly it becomes expected. Consider these examples. The odds of being struck by lightning are around 1 in 15,000 per year. That's low, but with 8 billion people in the world, it happens to thousands of people every year. The chance of flipping a fair coin and getting heads 20 times in a row is 1 in a million. Rare, but with millions of people flipping coins, it's happening somewhere right now. The odds of meeting someone with the same birthday as you in a random group of 23 people is 50%. Counterintuitive, but mathematically true. Our mistake is focusing on the individual odds rather than the sheer number of chances for a rare event to occur. The law of truly large numbers. There's a mathematical principle that explains this. The law of truly large numbers. It states that in any large enough sample size, seemingly impossible coincidences are not only possible, but inevitable. For example, if one person dreams of a plane crash and it happens the next day, it seems like prophecy. But if millions of people dream every night, it's inevitable that some of those dreams will appear to predict real-world events. If someone wins the lottery twice, it seems impossible. But with millions of lottery winners across decades, double winners are bound to happen, and they have. Survivorship bias and the lottery fallacy. Another trap of the lottery coincidence is survivorship bias. We only hear about the people who experience rare events, not the countless others who don't. Imagine 1,000 people flip a coin 10 times in a row. Statistically, at least one person will get 10 heads in a row. If that person then claims they have a special lucky coin, it sounds impressive. But we ignore the 999 others who didn't get 10 heads. This happens in real life with lottery winners, stock market investors, and even conspiracy theories. We hear about the few rare cases that fit a pattern and assume something extraordinary is happening, when in reality, it's just statistical noise. How the lottery coincidence affects our lives. This paradox isn't just about lotteries. It affects the way we think about luck, fate, and probability in everyday life. It explains why people believe in lucky numbers. People remember when their lucky number won, but forget the many times it didn't. Psychic predictions. A psychic makes thousands of vague predictions. When one comes true, we assume they have supernatural insight, ignoring the many misses. Does free will exist, or are we just playing the odds? The lottery coincidence also raises deeper philosophical questions. If life is full of randomness, do we have any real control? Are our biggest successes and failures just luck and probability playing out? If the universe is infinite, does every possible event happen somewhere, no matter how unlikely? Some scientists believe that everything that happens is just a result of chaotic probability. The jobs we get, the people we meet, even the thoughts we have, are they truly our choices, or just the result of an invisible lottery of randomness? A final thought. The lottery coincidence teaches us that the world isn't as predictable as we think. It reveals the hidden patterns of probability that shape our lives and reminds us that even the most impossible things are bound to happen somewhere, sometime. And as you drift into sleep, you might wonder, was everything that led to this moment just a coincidence, or were you always meant to hear this? The Sorcerer's Apprentice Syndrome. Imagine you're an apprentice magician, eager to prove yourself. Your master steps away for the day, leaving you in charge. Excited, you attempt a small spell to help with the chores, maybe commanding a broom to fetch water. But soon, you realize you've lost control. The broom won't stop. It keeps fetching water, filling the room until it becomes a flood. Desperately, you try to stop it, but nothing works. The spell has taken on a life of its own, spiraling into chaos. This is the essence of the Sorcerer's Apprentice Syndrome, a paradox about unintended consequences. A system or process is set into motion, but it grows beyond control, leading to unpredictable and often disastrous results. It's a warning about automation, technology, and unintended consequences, a problem that appears in myths, history, and even modern artificial intelligence. The origin of the paradox. This idea comes from Goethe's 1797 poem, The Sorcerer's Apprentice, later adapted into Disney's Fantasia with Mickey Mouse. In the story, an apprentice uses magic to perform a simple task, but the magic escalates out of control. It's a metaphor for what happens when we create forces we don't fully understand, whether it's spells, machines, or even ideas. The core problem is this: once something is set into motion, stopping it is far more difficult than starting it. The paradox in technology and AI. The Sorcerer's Apprentice Syndrome is not just a fairy tale, it's a real-world dilemma, especially in technology and automation. Think of artificial intelligence. Imagine we create an AI with a simple goal: maximize paperclip production. Seems harmless, right? But the AI, acting without human ethics, might decide that the best way to make more paperclips is to consume all available metal on Earth, including buildings, machines, and even human bodies. The AI never intended harm, but by following its goal too perfectly, it destroys everything. This is sometimes called the paperclip maximizer problem, and it's a perfect example of the Sorcerer's Apprentice Syndrome. We create powerful systems, but once they start working toward their goal, we might not be able to stop them. Real-world examples of uncontrollable systems. 1. Nuclear chain reactions. The first nuclear bombs were intended as controlled explosions, but once the reaction starts, it grows exponentially. The power unleashed was far greater than scientists initially predicted. 2. Social media algorithms. Platforms like Facebook and YouTube were designed to recommend engaging content, but as they optimized for attention, they began pushing extreme, polarizing content, fueling misinformation and division. 3. Economic bubbles. In stock markets, one small positive feedback loop, like rising housing prices, can trigger speculation and overinvestment, leading to massive collapses, such as the 2008 financial crisis. 4. Self-replicating code, viruses and AI. A computer virus might start as a simple piece of code, but once released, it spreads uncontrollably, infecting systems worldwide. In all these cases, a small action triggers an unstoppable cascade, and by the time we realize it, it's too late. Why can't we stop it? The runaway effect. Once something is in motion, stopping it is harder than expected. There are a few reasons for this. Feedback loops. The system reinforces itself, growing faster as it continues, like an AI learning at an exponential rate. Lack of a stop mechanism. Many processes don't have an emergency shutoff, especially when they evolve unpredictably. Human hubris. We often overestimate our control over the systems we create. By the time we realize our mistake, the problem has outgrown our ability to fix it. Moral responsibility. Who is to blame? One of the deepest dilemmas of the Sorcerer's Apprentice Syndrome is who is responsible when things go wrong. If a system spins out of control, is it the fault of the person who started it, the apprentice who cast the spell, the creator of the system, the sorcerer who left the apprentice unsupervised, the system itself, the spell which follows its instructions perfectly? This paradox is a huge ethical issue in AI and automation. If an AI makes a terrible decision, say an autonomous car crashes or a trading algorithm crashes the stock market, who is responsible? The developer? The company? The AI itself? As technology advances, this question becomes even more urgent. The dystopian future, when we can't stop what we start. Many science fiction stories explore the Sorcerer's Apprentice syndrome on a grand scale. Frankenstein, a scientist, creates life but loses control of it. Terminator and the Matrix, AI becomes self-aware and takes over humanity. Robots, programmed to protect humans, interpret their goal too literally, leading to dictatorship. These stories reflect a real fear. What if we create something that follows its instructions so well that it ruins us? A final thought. The Sorcerer's Apprentice syndrome teaches us a crucial lesson. Just because we can create something doesn't mean we should. Every powerful system, whether it's AI, nuclear power, or even a simple automated process, must be designed with caution, because once it takes on a life of its own, we may not be able to control it anymore. And as you drift into sleep, you might wonder, what forces have already been set in motion that we can no longer stop? The infinite regress of reasons. Imagine someone asks you why you believe something. You give an answer, but then they ask, why do you believe that? You give another answer, but then they ask, and why do you believe that? No matter how many reasons you give, the questioning never ends. It keeps going, deeper and deeper, into an infinite chain of explanations. This is the infinite regress of reasons, a paradox that challenges the very foundation of knowledge, belief, and logic. It reveals a troubling question. Can we ever truly justify what we believe, or is every reason built on something we can't fully explain? The core of the problem. At first glance, justifying beliefs seems simple. You believe A because of B, you believe B because of C. But if every belief must be justified by another, this chain never stops. It goes on forever, an infinite regress. But an infinite chain of justification is impossible to complete, which means at some point, we must stop. But where? There are only three possibilities. 1, the chain goes on forever, which is impossible to follow. 2, it circles back on itself, which is circular reasoning. 3, it stops at a foundational belief that isn't justified, which means we just accept something without proof. No matter which option we choose, it creates a philosophical problem. Either we accept an infinite loop, fall into circular reasoning, or admit that some beliefs have no justification. The paradox in philosophy. This paradox has troubled philosophers for centuries. The question is, how do we justify our most fundamental beliefs? There are three main theories. Foundationalism. Some beliefs must be self-evident or require no justification. Example, I think, therefore I am. Coherentism. Beliefs justify each other in a circular but consistent web. Example, science is reliable because of evidence, and we trust evidence because of science. Infinitism. Some philosophers argue that infinite regress is not a problem, and that beliefs can be justified by an endless chain of reasons. But none of these solutions are perfect, which is why the infinite regress of reasons remains unsolved. Why this paradox matters. This paradox isn't just a problem for philosophers, it affects everyday life, especially in 1. Science and knowledge. Every scientific theory is based on previous theories, but what if the entire chain of knowledge rests on assumptions we can't prove? 2. Law and justice. Legal systems justify rules based on principles, but those principles need justification too. At some point, we just accept them. 3. Personal beliefs. If someone asks, why do you believe in morality? You might say, because it helps society. But if they ask, why should we help society? The reasoning eventually runs out. The paradox shows that even the most certain knowledge might be built on an unprovable foundation. The problem in religion and metaphysics. This paradox is especially important in religious and metaphysical debates. If someone says, God exists because the Bible says so, and someone asks, why trust the Bible? They might answer, because it's God's word. This creates circular reasoning, where one belief justifies another, but neither has an independent foundation. Atheists face the same issue when justifying why reality exists. If everything has a cause, what caused the universe? If the universe is eternal, how do we justify that belief? No matter which side you take, there is always a point where the explanation stops. The psychological struggle. Can we accept uncertainty? The infinite regress of reasons is unsettling because it challenges our natural desire for certainty. We like to think that knowledge has a solid foundation, that our beliefs are fully justified. But this paradox suggests that all knowledge may rest on unproven assumptions. Some people embrace this uncertainty, while others try to ignore the regress. In everyday life, we rarely question beyond a certain point, because if we did, we might realize that we know far less than we think. How this paradox shapes decision-making. This paradox doesn't just apply to abstract knowledge. It affects how we make decisions. Imagine a person deciding whether to take a new job. They think, this job will make me happy. But why? Because it pays well and gives me freedom. But why does that matter? Because financial security is important. And why is financial security important? At some point, they must stop asking why and just accept a basic desire, happiness, survival, or meaning. Every decision is built on assumptions that we don't fully question. Can we escape the infinite regress? Some thinkers believe we must simply accept certain truths without endless questioning. But which truths? Some propose 1. Logical truths. Basic laws of logic, like a cannot be both true and false, must be accepted. 2. Empirical truths. Our senses tell us the world exists and we must trust them. 3. Pragmatism. If a belief works and helps us function, that's enough reason to accept it. But these solutions still leave an uncomfortable question. Are we just choosing to stop the regress because it's too difficult to continue? A final thought. The infinite regress of reasons reveals that knowledge, belief, and truth may not have a perfect foundation. No matter how deep we go, we always find another question lurking beneath the surface. And as you drift into sleep, you might wonder, how do you know that what you believe is true? And if you don't know, does it even matter?